I'm Carmine Gallo with Jocko Willink, former Navy SEAL officer, best-selling author, and now he can add MasterClass instructor to his list of accomplishments. Jocko, it is so good to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to see you as well.
And on a personal note, I am really proud, and I've said this to other people, I'm proud that you and I share a publishing house. St. Martin's Press and Macmillan publishes my books, and I know some of yours. If I'm going to be on anybody's team, I want to be on Jocko's team.
That seems like it would be a good idea.
Yeah, I think so. Jocko, the beginning of the first words in your new masterclass on leadership are really powerful. You say, I was never the most talented. I've never been the fastest, strongest, or smartest. You joined the Navy at 18. You go through boot camp and then immediately to SEAL training, the most grueling test of physical and mental endurance. You don't quit. You survive that training. You become a Navy SEAL. You lead men into battle. All of this implies that being the smartest, being the most talented is not what leadership is about. If that's the case, then how do we define leadership?
Yeah, clearly, I think it's pretty straightforward that when I say I was not the smartest, I was not the strongest, and I was not the fastest, if you know me, you would know all those things. Going through SEAL training, I don't think I ever won any races. I don't think I ever won any running races, never won any swims. But as you mentioned, I didn't quit, and I was a hard worker. And that ended up being the thing that was able to get me through training and start making a decent name for myself inside the SEAL teams, is working hard and, most important, taking care of my teammates and putting my teammates first. And then eventually moving up into a leadership position and then being in charge of a SEAL platoon and then a SEAL task unit and then in charge of the training out on the West Coast. So that was sort of the path that I went on. But I think the elements of being a good leader, and this is what I think people often miss, is leadership is a skill. It's a skill that you learn. And yes, there's some natural parts of it that you might have an aptitude for, but every part of leadership, there are things that you can do to improve. There are skills that you can learn. Just like playing basketball. Look, is it nice if you're 6'9" and you play basketball? Yes, that's a benefit. Is it nice if you're very coordinated and you play basketball? Yes, it is. But if you're a little bit smaller, you can learn techniques that can allow you to perform even against taller players. So this is what leadership is. And people often think that leadership is something that you're born with. And it's just not. It's skills that you pick up. It is absolutely something that you can learn. And I think that gets missed about leadership a lot.
I think it's also very important, something that you make clear in your masterclass. We are all leaders in some aspect of our lives. Leadership is not conferred just by title, or if you think of yourself as a leader. You may not think you're a leader, but you are. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, and clearly you've got the CEO of an organization and he's a leader, or you've got a senior vice president or an executive vice president, or you go all the way down the line and you get to this frontline person that is literally not in charge of anybody else. There's no one underneath them in the chain of command. How can they possibly consider themselves a leader? Well, they've got peers. And sometimes the peers are moving in one direction or another direction, and you know that that's not the best direction to go into, and you have to lead them in the right direction. Sometimes your boss is pointing you in the wrong direction. Sometimes your boss doesn't understand what's happening, and you, as a subordinate, have to lead your boss in the right direction. Then we get to family life. Clearly, in a family situation, You've got a spouse, and sometimes your spouse wants to go in one direction. Maybe you want to figure out a different direction, or you see another opportunity. So you have to lead your spouse in the right direction. You can't order your spouse. Well, you can. I don't recommend trying to order your spouse. And it's the same thing with your kids. You've got to lead your children in the right direction. So, and not to mention friends. You've got friends that are moving forward in life. They're doing things in their lives, and they might be moving in the wrong direction. You, as a human being, have to lead them in the right direction. So regardless of where you are in whatever business or company or team you work on, you are in a leadership position, and you have to know how to lead.
One of your goals in your masterclass and in all of your training is to make people better motivators, as you say, better motivators, better team builders, and better communicators. Well, I would argue that communication pervades all three of those attributes, team building and motivation. But I imagine you would agree that effective communication is foundational to success in any field.
There's no doubt that communication is one of the most critical skills. And I'll actually break that down a little bit further because there's multiple different forms of communication. And I think, once again, one thing that gets missed a lot is one of the most important aspects of communication is listening. And leaders spend oftentimes, unfortunately, most of their time talking, most of their time giving instructions, giving orders, and too little of their time listening. And I learned at a very young age in the SEAL teams that the good leaders were the ones that listened the most. Mm-hmm. And that is what I've always tried to do. And whenever I talk about communication, I always try and focus on the fact that the most key component of communication is actually listening.
Isn't that fascinating? The books that I write are all about presenting, presenting like a TED Talk or presenting like Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos. Everything is about presenting. And so people naturally assume, well, communication is about how you speak, how you craft a message, and those are all very important, but you bring up such a critical point that I don't necessarily focus on, but it is the number one skill that you'd better have as a leader communicator. You'd better be able to listen. Otherwise, you will have no foundation upon which to relay a message or to craft a message and galvanize teams. Thank you for bringing that up. Good point that I think most people miss.
Yeah, if I haven't listened to you, if I haven't listened to my team, if I haven't listened to the market, if I haven't listened to my consumers, if I haven't listened, you're right. I might be the most articulate communicator ever born, but what am I going to talk about? So listening, the key component that gets overlooked all too often.
In your masterclass that you're teaching, you say one of the most critical steps that all leaders must take is to communicate the why. That is such an important concept in communication. So let's take a deep dive into that. I think that people in general need to have a clear vision, a clear goal, a clear focus of what they are set out to achieve, but that has to come from somewhere. So break that down. What do we mean by leaders must communicate the why?
Yeah, we can get in the habit, and I think often the stereotypical version of what a leader is, people think of, well, what I already said, which is I'm the leader, so I'm going to talk a bunch. And then the leader says, oh, I'm going to talk a bunch. And in talking, I'm going to tell you what to do. So when I tell you what to do, you've got this very narrow, specific set of instructions of what you're going to do. Well, what are the chances that everything goes perfectly on our plan? The chances are not very strong. The chances are that the market's going to change, the competitor's going to do something we didn't expect. There is going to be unforeseen circumstances that unfold. And if you only know what you're supposed to do, you can't make any adjustments. You are only going to follow the instructions that you were given. So it's much more important that people understand not just what to do, but why they're doing it. Why are we going through this process? What is it that we're trying to achieve? And if I understand that, or if you understand that, and you're working for me, and you understand not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it, when some of these problems come up, when some of these issues arise, when the market shifts, when the competitors do something we didn't expect, you are able to actually make adjustments and still move towards that goal. But that only happens if you understand why you're doing what you're doing.
I think this is such an important concept that most people miss, especially when if they're thinking about military too. You were a Navy SEAL officer. You led men into some terrifying, grueling battles when you were on a mission. Let me play devil's advocate here, because I think most people would just assume that team in a military operation must know what to execute. Who cares if they know why they're doing it? In fact, in a lot of reasons, maybe they don't know the full reasons why. They have to know the what. So who cares? Why is the why so important in military and in the corporate battlefield?
Well, Carmine, let's say you're working for me and we're on a military operation and I tell you, hey, I want you to charge up that hill.
You're my superior. I've got to take it. I got to do what you say. I have to take my orders. That's what I'm trained to do.
So then you go charging up that hill, and just as you commence your assault, you realize that there is enemy bunkers in an elevated position that are able to, if you continue, they're going to slaughter your whole platoon. So, do I want you to continue charging up that hill? Do you think I want you to continue charging up that hill?
Of course not.
Of course I don't, because then your whole platoon's dead. Now, if you understand why you're doing it, and I say, hey, Carmine, I want you to go and charge up that hill and get some high ground so that we can control this valley. And you say, okay, Jocko, I've got it. So now you start charging up this hill. You realize that there's a enemy machine gun emplacement on that hill, and you say, oh, this is not good. But what Jocko wanted me to do is get high ground, and there's another hill right over here. Let's go up that other hill. Oh, by the way, you go up that other hill, and guess what? There's no enemy machine gun emplacement. And your platoon gets up there safely, and now you have the high ground. You accomplish the mission. Now you can oversee the valley, and you have a superior position over the enemy that was bunkered in on another hill. That is why, especially in military operations, it is critical that the team understands why they're doing what they're doing.
That's a powerful distinction. Jocko, you once wrote, there are no bad teams, only bad leaders. Take me back to SEAL training. Coronado, California, you're undergoing Hell Week, that infamous Hell Week, when you're sleep deprived, undergoing grueling physical and mental tests. Like you said, most people quit. You didn't, but it's still only a select few people can pass. The students are grouped into teams for boat crews, 7-man boat crews. Tell me why instructors, yes, they're looking at all the students, they have to perform, but they're more focused on the leader. Tell me why, and I think this is powerful, what happens when they swap or rotate the leaders from one boat to another?
Yeah, this is something that you see in basic SEAL training, and it's something that you see in the SEAL teams, and it's something you see in any organization. Leadership is the most important thing on the battlefield. It's the most important thing in business. It's the most important thing in life. And this is plainly obvious when you're watching SEAL training. If you have a good boat crew leader, so there's a boat crew, like you said, of 6, 7, 8 guys, there's a good leader in charge of that team is going to perform well. If there's a bad leader in charge of that team, they are not going to perform well. And in SEAL training, sort of to prove to the leaders themselves what was happening, especially to those bad leaders, sometimes they would take the good leader, put them in a boat crew that was performing poorly, take the leader from the boat crew that was performing poorly and put him into the boat crew that was performing well. And you'd see, especially the bad leader that got switched would watch his old boat crew, which had lost 4, 5, 6 races, these competitive races that they set up, and all of a sudden he would see that boat crew with the new leader performing well and even winning races. It would be plainly obvious the only thing that was changed was that leader, and that leader would make all the difference. That would happen in SEAL training too. I ran the SEAL training for the SEAL teams on the West Coast, and we'd have a platoon that would be coming through training and they would be performing below standard. And of course we'd counsel the leader, but eventually sometimes we'd have to fire that leader. And we would watch, we'd have a training operation with that bad leader in charge of the platoon, fire that bad leader. The very next day with a new leader, they'd perform exceptionally. So it's so plain to see that, look, a SEAL platoon, there's some guys in the SEAL platoon that are great. There's some guys that are okay. There's some slugs in the SEAL platoon, but the SEAL platoon is the SEAL platoon. Put a good leader in there, and that platoon will be a good platoon. Put a bad leader in there, and that platoon will be a bad platoon. So that is why we say there are no bad teams, only bad leaders.
Perfect example. Perfect example. Leadership is foundational and essential.
And sometimes we get pushback on that. Sometimes there's pushback on that. Yeah, but Jocko, look, I got this guy on my team that doesn't show up on time, or I got this other guy on my team and he doesn't do his job correctly, or I got this other guy on my team and he doesn't know how to do his job. Okay, who's in charge of those people? Who's in charge of explaining them why it's important to be on time? Who's in charge of selecting them? Who brought them here? Who is actually supposed to be training them to be able to do their job? So if I've got people on my team that aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, I brought them here. I'm supposed to train them. And by the way, if they can't do their job, they're not capable, I'm actually the one that's in charge of getting rid of them. So once again, no bad teams, only bad leaders.
One of your leadership laws is keep it simple. That resonated with me because I call simple a superpower. I think a leader who uses simple words, concise, clear explanations stands a much better chance of motivating teams, galvanizing teams around a common mission. But I'd like to hear from your perspective. Let's break it down. What do you mean by keep it simple? What does that mean from a military perspective and what you saw on the battlefield and how it applies to corporate leaders?
Well, two components. The one that you already mentioned, and I know it's your specialty, is communication. And yes, 100%, you have to communicate in a simple, clear, concise manner that the team understands. If the team doesn't understand the words that you're using or the way you are phrasing things, they are not going to be able to execute. So communication has to be simple, clear, and concise.
Easier said than done.
It is indeed.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, we have to come up with a plan that is a simple plan. The more complexities we add into a plan, the greater chance there is for failure. This is especially true in combat, but it's true in any organization. The more maneuvers we have to make, the more communication that a plan requires, the more points of failure there are, the better chance there is of complete and total failure. So we always want to pick the simplest course of action that we possibly can. And look, are there some times we're working a project that is large and complex and there's no way around it? Of course. We work with aerospace companies, and they've got to take these extremely complex plans and break them down into simple sections that everyone can understand and execute.
I think this is an area that people know intuitively. Oh, yes, I know I have to keep the plan simple, the program simple. But I find that most people still have a lot of difficulty understanding what it means to break things down into their simple parts. Do you have any good tips on how best to take complex initiative, complex ideas, and keep them simple? What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, you can do some pretty straightforward things like, hey, I'm going to give myself 5 bullet points to explain this plan. If I can't explain it in 5 bullet points, I've got to break it up into 2 separate iterative steps that we're going to go through. So there's a simple thing that you can do. Say, okay, I've got to brief my team.
Yep.
I'm going to give myself not 7-sentence bullet points either. I mean 1 sentence, 1 phrase bullet points. You give yourself 5 of them and you say, I'm going to be able to explain this plan in 5 simple bullet points. You put yourself some constraints on yourself. It's going to force you to simplify things, and it's a very effective way to do it.
Jocko, speaking of bullet points, I have noticed something about you, and I'm wondering if this comes from military training, because you mentioned the focus on just a few bullet points on any presentation, any initiative. I noticed that in your writing and in your speaking, you break things up into 3s. You typically have like 3 important leadership traits or 3 goals. Is that something that comes from leadership training? You don't say there's 18 outcomes from this masterclass. There's 3. Where does that come from? That has to be either conscious or intentional in some way. Getting back to what we're saying, 3 or 5 bullet points.
There's a saying in the SEAL teams that the subordinates would sometimes tell the leadership, and that is, hey, boss, I can remember 3 things. You better make sure you know which 3 things you want me to remember. So we're going out on an operation. If you tell me 18 things, I'm not going to remember them. You can tell me 3 things. Those are the things I am going to remember. And this is probably why I generally put things into bullet points of 3, if I can.
It's ingrained in you then. You're wired for it. But I think there's science behind it too, and I think that's very powerful. People try to convey too much information in one sitting. That's not simple. And that's why I'm really glad that you're breaking it down when you say keep it simple. Jocko, congratulations on all of your success with your writing, with Echelon Front, your training company, and now with MasterClass. When you were training at Buds and you were in the water undergoing Hell Week, I wonder if you ever thought to yourself, someday I'm going to be teaching online classes that are really popular.
Well, when I was going through SEAL training, I thought that and hoped that one day I could carry a machine gun in a SEAL platoon. That was my dream.
Well, you're a good instructor, and we need good instructors, especially for this foundational skill of leadership that everyone needs. Jocko, thank you so much. Good to meet you and good to talk to you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.